The scent of antiseptic still clung to my clothes, a sterile ghost that followed me from the hospital room where I had spent weeks recovering. My world had shrunk to the four white walls of that room, the rhythmic beep of monitors, and the ache in my hip that was a constant, throbbing reminder of my body's betrayal. But I was going home. The thought was a small warm sun in the cold expanse of my recent memory. Home where the scent of old books and Frank's lingering pipe tobacco filled the air. Home where every scuff on the hardwood floor told a story. My daughter Stephanie was driving, her hands gripping the steering wheel with a tension that seemed at odds with the bright, sunny afternoon. I had trusted her with everything. While I was submerged in a fog of pain and medication, she had managed my affairs, my bills, my house. I had given her the power of attorney without a second thought. She was my daughter, my only child. Who else could I trust? I watched the familiar streets of my neighborhood slide by, the old oak trees forming a canopy over the road just as they had for the 50 years I'd lived there. Almost there, I murmured, a smile touching my lips for what felt like the first time in months. My house was just around the next corner, a sturdy brick sentinel that had guarded my life, my marriage, my memories. I pictured myself sitting in my favorite armchair, a cup of tea steaming in my hands, the quiet comfort of my own space wrapping around me like a well-loved blanket. Stephanie said nothing. Her knuckles were white on the wheel. She didn't make the turn. We drove straight past my street, the entrance to my entire world, and I felt a jolt of confusion that was sharper than any surgical pain. "Stephanie dear, you missed the turn," I said, my voice gentle, assuming it was a simple mistake. She was probably tired, stressed from looking after me. "We're not going there, Mom," she said, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Her tone was flat, devoid of any emotion. It was a tone I had heard before, usually when she was about to dismiss a suggestion or end a conversation she found inconvenient. A cold dread, heavy and thick as mud, began to seep into my bones. The sun outside seemed to dim, the world losing its color. "What do you mean we're not going there? Where are we going?" "Stephanie, that's my home," my voice trembled, the nascent strength I had gathered in the hospital starting to crumble. She finally glanced at me, her expression unreadable, almost bored. "I sold it," she said, as casually as if she were announcing she'd bought a new brand of coffee. The upkeep was too much, a financial drain. It was for the best, the words didn't compute. They were just sounds disconnected from meaning, hanging in the suffocating silence of the car. Sold it. My home. The house Frank and I had built not with just bricks and mortar, but with laughter, arguments, scraped knees, and decades of quiet, unwavering love. Every rosebush in the garden was planted by my own hands. The chip in the kitchen countertop was from the time a 5-year-old Stephanie had tried to help me make cookies. It was not a property. It was a living, breathing extension of me, of my entire life. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My mind frantically tried to find purchase, to understand the impossible. You sold my house? Without asking me. I whispered, the words catching in my throat. But where will I live? A faint, exasperated sigh escaped her lips. "Well, that's the other thing," she said, turning onto a street I didn't recognize, one lined with modern, impersonal apartment buildings. "Mark and I talked about it. We just don't have the space, Mom. And honestly, we can't be your full-time caregivers. It's not fair to our lives, to our children." The logic was so cold, so clinical, it was monstrous. She spoke of fairness while committing the most profound injustice I had ever known. My hope, which had been a tiny flickering flame, was instantly extinguished, leaving behind a bitter, acrid smoke of despair. "So I can't live with you?" I asked, the question sounding pathetic even to my own ears. I was a 72-year-old woman, begging my own child for a roof over my head. The humiliation was a hot brand on my soul. She pulled into the parking lot of a large, sterile-looking building with a sign that read Golden Valley Senior Living. It wasn't a valley, and it certainly didn't look golden. It looked like a place where life went to quietly end. Stephanie finally turned off the engine and faced me, her expression hardening into something I had never seen before, a mask of cold, final resolution. Her eyes, the same blue eyes I had gazed into with adoration when she was a baby, were now like chips of ice. "We're done taking care of you," she said, each word a perfectly polished stone of cruelty. The arrogance in her voice was staggering. It wasn't a statement of regret or difficulty. It was a declaration of liberation. She was freeing herself from the burden of her own mother. The next few hours were a blur of numb horror. I was processed like a piece of luggage, my meager belongings from the hospital unpacked by a harried aide into a small beige room that smelled of disinfectant and faded regret. Stephanie signed the papers, her pen scratching across the pages with an air of brisk efficiency. She gave me a perfunctory hug, the kind one gives a distant acquaintance. "It's for the best, Mom. You'll be safe here. They have doctors," she said, already backing toward the door, her car keys jingling in her hand like a promise of her imminent escape. Then she was gone. The door clicked shut, and the sound echoed in the crushing silence of the room. A final definitive punctuation mark on the end of my life as I had known it. I stood there, leaning heavily on my cane, and stared at the single window, which overlooked a parking lot. I was a prisoner, sentenced without a trial, my only crime being that I had grown old and inconvenient. The weight of her betrayal was a physical thing, a crushing pressure on my chest that made it impossible to breathe. My home was gone. My daughter was gone. All that was left was this beige box and the echoing cruelty of her words. "We're done taking care of you." The first 2 months in that place were a descent into a gray, featureless abyss. Time lost its shape, stretching and compressing in unpredictable ways. Days were marked only by the rattle of the meal cart in the hallway and the forced cheerfulness of the staff. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my own existence, an invisible woman warehoused and forgotten. I spoke to no one, and no one spoke to me beyond the rote questions about my comfort and medication. The other residents seemed to be in a similar state of suspended animation, their eyes vacant, their movements slow and listless. We were a collection of discarded parents, a museum of obsolescence. My heart, which I thought had been shattered in the car that day, had instead frozen into a solid lump of ice. I replayed Stephanie's words over and over, dissecting them, searching for some hidden meaning, some justification. But there was none. There was only the stark, ugly truth of her selfishness. My only connection to the outside world was my younger sister, Geraldine. She called every evening, her voice a warm, steady anchor in the churning sea of my despair. I hadn't told her the full extent of Stephanie's cruelty, only that I was in a home for a little while to finish my recovery. I was too ashamed to admit the truth, but Geraldine, who had always seen through facades, sensed the deep well of my sorrow. "Barbara, you sound so far away," she'd say. "Are you sure you're all right? You know Stephanie, she can be single-minded." Her gentle prodding was a lifeline. She never judged, never said, "I told you so," though she had witnessed Stephanie's entitled behavior for years. She just listened, and in her listening, she gave me a space to feel something other than numb despair. One evening, after a particularly bleak day where I'd watched a family visit the woman across the hall, showering her with hugs and gifts, the icy shell around my heart finally cracked. The pain that flooded in was immense, but it was different from the shock I'd felt before. It was hot. It was anger. A deep seismic rage that shook me to my core. How could she? How could the child I had sacrificed everything for, the daughter I had loved with every fiber of my being, discard me like a piece of broken furniture? The question was a burning coal in my mind. That night I didn't just cry. I wept with a fury that felt cleansing. The sadness was still there, a vast dark ocean. But now a fire was lit on its shore. The vindicated matriarch inside me, a woman I hadn't known existed, was beginning to stir. I decided then and there in that sterile room that I would not fade away. I would not let Stephanie write the final chapter of my story. It was a Tuesday 2 months to the day since my arrival, when the front desk called my room. "Barbara, you have a phone call." A Mr. Kenneth Ramsey. The name took a moment to register. Kenneth had been our family lawyer for decades, a kind, meticulous man who had handled Frank's will. I hadn't spoken to him since Frank passed away 5 years ago. A flicker of anxiety went through me. Had Stephanie done something else? Was there more bad news? I took the call on the communal phone in the hallway, my hand trembling slightly as I held the receiver. Barbara? Kenneth Ramsey here. I am so sorry to bother you, but I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your daughter said you were traveling. His voice was laced with a confusion that confirmed my suspicion. Stephanie had been actively hiding me. I'm not traveling, Kenneth. I'm in a nursing home, I said, the words tasting like ash. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. A nursing home? He finally asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Barbara, why? Your house. He trailed off, and I could hear the rustle of papers. That's not important right now, he continued, his tone shifting to one of urgency. Listen to me carefully. I'm calling because a specific provision in Frank's will has just come into effect. He set it up to mature on the 5-year anniversary of his passing, which was last week. I held my breath, my knuckles white on the receiver. A provision? What kind of provision? Barbara, he said, his voice low and serious. Frank left you a fortune. The word hung in the air, unreal and impossible. Fortune. It sounded like something from a storybook. What are you talking about, Kenneth? Frank and I were comfortable, but we were not wealthy. Everything went into the house, into Stephanie. My voice broke on her name. Frank was a very smart man, Barbara. And a very private one, Kenneth explained patiently. Long before he retired, he started a private investment fund. He never touched it. He told me it was your safety net. He said, and I quote, just in case I'm not there to protect her, he set it up so that it would grow untouched for 5 years after he was gone. He wanted to make sure you were truly settled before you even knew it existed. I sank onto a nearby chair, the hallway around me fading into a blur. Frank. My dear thoughtful Frank. Even from beyond the grave, he was taking care of me. He had seen something in Stephanie, a potential for the very cruelty she had shown, and he had prepared for it. The love in that act was so immense, so overwhelming it washed over me, cleansing the filth of Stephanie's betrayal. Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in months, they were not tears of sorrow or anger. They were tears of profound, gut-wrenching gratitude. How much, Kenneth? I whispered. He told me the number. It was staggering, a figure so large my mind could barely grasp it. It was more money than I could ever have imagined. For a moment, I felt nothing but a dizzying sense of vertigo. Then a new feeling began to crystallize, sharp and clear and powerful. It was the feeling of control, the feeling of possibility. The beige walls of the nursing home seemed to recede, to become flimsy and insignificant. I was no longer a prisoner. I was a woman with a fortune, a secret weapon that my tormentor knew nothing about. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. The game had just changed. Kenneth, I said, my voice no longer trembling but firm, imbued with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I need you to do 2 things for me. First, I want you to arrange for my immediate discharge from this place. And second, I need you to find me the best physical therapist in the state. The next day, a sleek black car, sent by Kenneth, pulled up to the entrance of Golden Valley. I walked out of that building on my own 2 feet, leaning on my cane but with my head held high. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I simply left, leaving the ghost of the broken woman I had been behind in that beige room. The first call I made from the car was to Geraldine. When I told her everything, the sale of the house, Stephanie's words, the nursing home, and finally Frank's incredible secret, she was silent for a long moment, a silence filled with her own simmering fury on my behalf. Then she said, "Oh, Barbie, that monster. You come here. You come to my house right now." Living with Geraldine was like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a sealed tomb. Her small, cozy apartment was filled with clutter and life and the smell of baking bread. It was the complete opposite of the sterile order of the nursing home and the hollow emptiness of my sold house. She fussed over me, but not in the way one fusses over an invalid. She treated me like her sister, like an equal who had just been through a terrible ordeal. We stayed up late talking, drinking tea, and for the first time I let the full story of my life with Stephanie pour out. The constant financial demands, the emotional manipulation, the way she and her husband, Mark, always made me feel like an inconvenience, a walking ATM whose only purpose was to fund their lifestyle. Geraldine listened, her expression growing harder with every word. I knew it, she muttered. I always knew she was a user. Frank saw it too, didn't he? That clever, wonderful man, with Kenneth's help. I embarked on my recovery with a vengeance. The physical therapist he found was a miracle worker. A tough but encouraging woman who pushed me past the limits I thought I had. The pain in my hip began to recede, replaced by a growing strength. As my body healed, so did my spirit. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a wild, consuming fire. It had been forged into something hard and sharp, resolve. I had the means, and now I had the will. My first major decision was about Geraldine. She had been living in her small, rented apartment for 20 years, working a thankless job at a department store with a meager pension to look forward to. She had offered me her home without a second of hesitation. It was my turn to give back. One afternoon, I sat her down at her small kitchen table. Jerry, I began, I want to do something. Frank's gift. It's not just for me. It's for us. For our security, I told her my plan. I was going to pay off her debts, fund her retirement, and buy us a house. A proper house with a garden, where we could live out our years in peace and comfort. She protested, of course. She was proud and had never asked for a thing in her life. But I was firm. You took me in when my own daughter threw me away. I told her, my voice thick with emotion. You gave me back my life. This isn't a gift. It's a correction. It's the way things are supposed to be. The tears in her eyes were all the acceptance I needed. We spent the next few weeks with a real estate agent looking at houses. It was a joyous, exhilarating experience. We weren't just buying a property. We were building a fortress, a sanctuary for our new life. Meanwhile, Stephanie had started to notice my absence. A few weeks after I left the nursing home, she called Geraldine's number. My sister handed me the phone, a supportive hand on my shoulder. Mom? Is that you? Stephanie's voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. The home said you were discharged. Where are you? What's going on? There was no concern in her tone, only accusation. The old me would have been flustered, apologetic. The new me was calm, detached. I'm fine, Stephanie. I'm with my sister, I said coolly. With Aunt Jerry? In that tiny apartment? Why would you go there? You need professional care, she insisted, the hypocrisy of her statement breathtaking. I'm getting the care I need, I replied, my voice like steel. Thank you for your concern, but I have things handled. What do you mean? Handled? I'm your daughter. I have a right to know what you're doing, she sputtered, her voice rising in frustration. A right? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. That's interesting. Did I have a right to know you were selling my home? Did I have a right to a place in yours? Your rights seem to be a very one-sided affair. I didn't wait for her to respond. I simply hung up the phone. The click of the receiver was one of the most satisfying sounds I had ever heard. It was the sound of a door closing, a chain breaking. We found the perfect house. It was a beautiful single-story home with large windows that let in the afternoon sun, and a sprawling backyard just waiting for a garden. It was smaller than my old house, but it felt more like home than that place had in years. It was ours. Geraldine and I moved in on a crisp autumn day, and the moment we stepped across the threshold, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a peace I thought I would never feel again. We spent our days planning the garden, decorating the rooms, and simply enjoying the quiet companionship. I was no longer a burden, an inconvenience, or a ghost. I was a homeowner. I was a sister. I was myself again. Word of my new life eventually trickled back to Stephanie. Small towns have a way of spreading news, and the story of the two sisters who suddenly bought a lovely house on the edge of town was bound to be a topic of conversation. It wasn't long before the inevitable happened. We were planning a small housewarming party, just a few of Geraldine's close friends and our new friendly neighbors. As we were setting out plates of food, the doorbell rang. Geraldine went to answer it, and I heard a voice that made the blood in my veins run cold. Aunt Jerry. I was just in the neighborhood. I heard Mom was with you and I've been so worried. Stephanie stood in the doorway, a picture of feigned concern. She was holding a bouquet of flowers, and her face was arranged in an expression of remorseful sweetness that was utterly nauseating. Beside her, her husband Mark hovered awkwardly, a sheepish grin plastered on his face. They had clearly heard the rumors, smelled the money, and come to reclaim their prize. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it. This was the moment of reckoning. Geraldine's face was a mask of stone. "She's busy, Stephanie," she said, not moving to let them in. "Oh, please," Stephanie cooed, trying to peer around my sister. "Mom, are you there? I just want to talk. I've made a terrible mistake. I miss you so much." The words were a performance, every syllable dripping with insincerity. I took a deep breath, the cold resolve I had cultivated over the past months settling over me like a suit of armor. I walked to the door, my cane tapping a steady, resolute rhythm on the new floor. I stood beside Geraldine, looking my daughter squarely in the eye. "Hello, Stephanie," I said, my voice calm and even. Her face broke into a relieved, radiant smile. "Mom! Oh, thank God. You look wonderful." She stepped forward, arms outstretched for a hug, the flowers offered like a treaty. I didn't move. I simply stood there, a silent, unbreachable wall. Her arms dropped awkwardly to her sides. "Can we come in? Please." "I need to explain." I looked at Geraldine, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. We stepped back, allowing them to enter the foyer of my new home. Their eyes darted around, taking in the tasteful furniture, the fresh paint, the sheer, undeniable evidence of wealth. I saw a flicker of avarice in Mark's eyes that was instantly suppressed. Stephanie's performance, however, was flawless. "Mom, I am so sorry," she began, her voice quivering with expertly faked emotion. "I wasn't thinking clearly. The stress of your surgery, the house. I was overwhelmed. Putting you in that place was the worst decision of my life. I've barely slept since. Can you ever forgive me?" I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, allowing her words to curdle. Our few guests had fallen quiet in the living room, their conversations tapering off as they sensed the unfolding drama. I wanted them to hear this. I wanted witnesses. "Forgive you," I repeated, my voice quiet but carrying through the still house. "Which part am I forgiving you for, Stephanie? For selling the home my husband and I built, the only home I had, without my knowledge or consent? Or for looking me in the eye and telling me you were done taking care of me? Perhaps it was for dumping me in a facility and lying to our family lawyer about my whereabouts so you could ensure I remained buried and out of the way. You'll have to be more specific." The color drained from her face. The mask of sweet remorse shattered, and for a second, I saw the raw, ugly greed beneath. "That's not fair," she stammered. "I was trying to protect you. The house was a liability. A liability that you quickly turned into cash for your own benefit, I assume," I countered, my voice still unervingly calm. "You didn't do it to protect me. You did it because you saw an opportunity. You saw a helpless old woman, and you decided to cash in her life's work. You threw me away, Stephanie. You threw me away like a piece of trash because I had become inconvenient." Her composure completely crumbled. Her voice rose to a shrill, desperate pitch. "It wasn't like that. And what is all this?" She gestured wildly around the beautiful room. "Where did you get the money for this? That should be my inheritance. Dad's money should have come to me. You owe me." There it was. The truth, naked and grasping. It had never been about my welfare. It had always been about the money. The guests in the living room were now staring, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. Mark grabbed Stephanie's arm, hissing, "Steph, stop it." Not here, but she was beyond reason, her entitlement raging like a wildfire. "No," she shrieked, shaking him off. "She owes me. After everything I did for her." I took a step forward, my presence suddenly seeming to fill the entire space. The frail woman she had abandoned was gone forever. "Everything you did?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. You mean the years I paid for your education? The down payment I gave you for your house? The countless times I bailed you and your husband out of your financial messes? That is what I did for you. And in return, you sold my past and tried to steal my future. You don't seem to understand, Stephanie. The money you're so desperate for was left to me by your father for one specific reason: to protect me from you. A collective gasp went through the room. Stephanie stared at me, her mouth agape, her face a blotchy mess of fury and humiliation. She had been so certain of her power over me, so confident in my weakness, that she had walked directly into a trap of her own making. She had exposed her own monstrous nature in front of everyone. I looked at her, at the child I had once loved more than life itself, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a vast empty distance. The woman you threw away is gone, I said, my voice soft but final. You are looking at a stranger. Now I think it's time for you to leave my home. Mark, his face burning with shame, practically dragged a sobbing, hysterical Stephanie out of the door. Their retreat a pathetic and undignified scramble. The door closed and a profound silence fell over the house. Then one of the new neighbors, a kind-faced woman named Carol, began to applaud softly. Soon everyone was clapping, not for the drama, but for the quiet, unshakable dignity I had reclaimed. Geraldine came to my side and wrapped her arm around me. I leaned into her, not out of weakness but out of love. I was free. In the aftermath of that day, a deep and lasting peace settled into my life. I blocked Stephanie's number and instructed Kenneth to refuse any and all communication from her. The legal ties were severed, but more importantly, the emotional ones were too. I mourned the daughter I thought I had, the love I thought we shared, but I did not mourn the grasping, selfish woman she had revealed herself to be. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about reconciliation. I could forgive her for my own peace of mind, releasing the poison of her betrayal from my soul, but I did not have to let her back into my life. Some doors, once closed, need to remain locked forever. Life with Geraldine was a gift. We planted a magnificent garden, filled with the roses I had missed so dearly and vegetables we cooked with every night. We traveled, taking small trips to see the ocean and the mountains, things I had always wanted to do, but had never had the time or money for. I reconnected with old friends, my newfound confidence drawing people to me. I was no longer Barbara, the sad widow, the burdensome mother. I was just Barbara, a woman living her life on her own terms. My true fortune wasn't the money in the bank. It was this. It was the freedom, the dignity, the quiet joy of a life reclaimed. One day, while driving past Golden Valley Senior Living, I felt an unexpected pull. It was not a pull of trauma, but one of purpose. I thought of the faces I had seen in those hallways, the vacant eyes, the quiet despair of being forgotten. I had escaped, but what about them? The next week I walked back through those same doors, not as a resident but as a volunteer. The staff looked at me with confusion, some with a hint of shame. I ignored them. I went to the residents. I sat with the woman who never had visitors. I read to the man whose eyesight was failing. I listened to their stories, stories of lives lived, of children who were too busy, of a world that had moved on without them. I became their advocate, their friend, their testament that it was not over. I used some of Frank's money to fund better activities, to bring in musicians and artists, to fill the gray hallways with color and life. I was not just helping them. I was healing the last vestiges of my own wound. In their eyes, I saw the woman I had been, and in my presence, I hoped they saw the person they could still be. I had been sent to that place to be discarded, but I had returned to it with a purpose. Stephanie thought she was ending my story. In reality, she had just given me the power to write a much better one. What would you do in this person's place? Would you have found it in your heart to forgive your daughter and let her back into your life? Or would you have kept your distance as I did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read your opinions. And please write me where you heard this story. It warms my heart to know how far these words can travel. If you enjoyed my story and would like to support the creation of more content like this, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. You can also show your support with a super thanks donation. Every little bit helps me bring these important stories to light. There are many other stories waiting for you. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.